Joining us at this Onward event on how innovation can transform the UK services industries and contribute to the recovery from the pandemic. It's fantastic to see you all here this afternoon. My name is Will Tanner, if you don't know me, and I am lucky enough to be the director of a think tank called Onward. He did that last year and the year before. And we are dedicated to levelling up opportunity and strengthening community in all parts of the United Kingdom, especially in those places where opportunity and community have been in decline or scarce in recent years or decades. And I want to start today's discussion just by thanking our brilliant panel for being here today, and also all of you for joining. And thirdly, to the Solicitors Regulatory Authority for sponsoring this event and helping us put on such an important discussion at such a vital time. It's fantastic to have your support. Thank you for being here. Now, in July, the government published their innovation strategy. They placed innovation and the diffusion of new technologies and processes at the heart of ministers' plans for growth. The document proclaims that we need a surge of business-led innovation and made clear government's ambition to be a world-leading science, technology and cyber power, allowing industry to grow and innovate. So it is clear that there is enormous political will to use innovation, research, development, new technologies to drive fundamental changes in the UK economy. There are some who might view this as a challenge to existing working practices, to vested interests, but I think today's discussion will focus on the opportunity, because it is an amazing opportunity to do things differently, to drive up productivity, to unlock new sources of value for the economy. And I think this opportunity is particularly true in the part of the economy we're due to talk about today. The UK's professional services industry, perhaps particularly focusing on the role of digital innovation in the law, given some of our panellists, where the UK is already world-leading, I think in many respects. But we will inevitably need to adapt to continue to compete internationally and to deliver better value for companies, for customers, and for the wider economy. So we are going to ask today how to drive innovation across those industries, how to deliver more effective, more efficient, more adaptive services to customers. The role of regulation in promoting that, because regulators do have a role to play, but also how the public sector can lead by example and indeed steward new industries too. And I'm delighted to have such a formidable panel of speakers to help us get into some of those questions. We are first going to come to someone who's only been in his role for a matter of weeks, so he's just getting his feet under the table, but that person is Chris Philp, the new Parliamentary Under Secretary of State of the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, a former McKinsey consultant, so someone who knows this from an industry perspective. Also, I should add, a former member of Onward's advisory board. We're incredibly lucky to have Chris involved in Onward when we launched in 2018. I'm then going to come to Laura Farris, MP, the MP for Newbury, a practising barrister in court next week, I understand, and someone who I know has thought about these issues deeply from both a professional kind of legal perspective and also in her role in Parliament. I will then come to Guy Opperman, the Pensions Minister, also someone who was trained in the law, called to the bar, and someone who I think is now the second longest serving pensions minister, very, very close to being the longest serving pensions minister.
I've only got to hang on another 150 days.
Very good.
Clinging on to the role.
Well, I have no doubt that you will earn that title, and quite right too, Guy. So thank you for joining us today. Fourth, I'm going to come to Charlotte Holloway, who's UK and I Government Relations Director at Zoom, also a board member at Tech UK. And finally, I'm going to come to Tracy Vigo, Executive Director at the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So thank you all for joining us. We only have an hour, and you're not here to hear me talk. So I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just going to hand over to our first speaker to set out his thoughts, as I say, just initially in the briefs, and don't expect, I suspect, enormous policy announcements from Chris, although you may surprise us, but very interested to hear your initial take as you take on this.
Wonderful, Will, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us this evening. Yeah, as Will said, I am a newly minted Minister for Technology and Digital Economy. Guy is one of the longest serving ministers in the government. I am currently in this role, one of the newest, and I hope I don't mess anything up and set a bad record as the shortest serving Minister for Technology, alongside Guy's record as the longest serving Minister in the DWP. So I was particularly pleased a couple of weeks ago when the PM gave me a call and offered me this position. I say offered me this position, it was more of an instruction than an offer. You don't really get much choice in these things. But I was particularly pleased to be appointed because my background before being elected wasn't just at McKinsey, as Will said, but I set up and ran a series of businesses before entering Parliament, one of which was tech-enabled, and it eventually got floated on the stock market, and after a couple of takeovers is now part of Tesco. So I see part of my role at DCMS now as helping other British businesses go through that same life cycle of being, set up from scratch, raising venture capital funds in maybe 1 or 2 rounds, as we did, and eventually becoming public companies. Because I think helping companies, businesses in the UK, along that journey is a critical part of our national future. And I think we should fully embrace, with enthusiasm and indeed delight, the opportunities that the digital economy presents us. Now, Tracy was saying a moment ago before we started that she had the misfortune to be at the Labour Party conference a week or so ago, an unpleasant experience from which I assume she's only just recovering. But she said when she was talking about digital opportunities there was a certain amount of scepticism for various different reasons. But I don't see digitalisation as a threat to employment or to opportunity. I see it as an enabler of both of those things. Now, it's very easy for some people, particularly if they have a backward-looking mentality, to say, well, what about the threats to employment that digitalisation and technologisation of jobs may present? And I think if you look at history, you can see very clearly that view is misguided. The Labour Party view is misguided. If you look back 300 years, 98% of jobs were in agriculture. Today it is 0.5%. So it is quite clear that as new technology develops, as it did 200 years ago in agriculture, and as it has over the last 50 or 60 years in digital, new opportunities are created to replace those where jobs have been mechanised or digitised. And in fact, the net benefit to the economy is enormous. So I'm a huge optimist about what digitalisation can do for this country and for our economy. And I see it as critical to addressing some of the structural, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to admit there are any structural weaknesses in our economy, but if there was a structural weakness, if there was a structural weakness that I would admit to amongst friends behind closed doors, it would be productivity, right? The productivity per hour worked in the UK is enormously lower than in some other European countries, and indeed the USA. And I see a fuller embrace of technology as critical in all sectors, not just the one we're discussing today, but all sectors, as critical to addressing that challenge. And I think that is something we need to seize with both hands and not view it in any way as a threat. Now, in that spirit, I am pleased to report that the UK is doing a phenomenal job in tech. It is growing at a phenomenal rate of knots. It is currently supporting 3 million jobs, but it's growing at almost twice the rate of any other employment sector. And I see it as the government's job to just enable that to happen as much as we can by creating the right environment, by encouraging businesses, and by creating the right preconditions. Let me just give you a few of some evidence to support my bold assertion that we're leading Europe in the digital space. First of all, there is a new tech company founded every 30 minutes, a truly phenomenal achievement. And in the first 6 months of this year alone, UK tech businesses raised £13.5 billion of private capital, of VC capital. That is more than any other country in Europe by miles. In fact, it's twice the second place country, which is Germany. I'm not quite sure how the French tech sector is doing at the moment. Last I heard, they're attempting to sell some obsolete submarine technology that's become unexpectedly and suddenly
on eBay.
Available on eBay. Yes, exactly. So far this year, we have minted 20 new unicorns, companies with $1 billion valuation. We've got 105 in total, which is more than Germany, Israel, and France added together. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, we are by far the European leaders, second only to China and the US globally. And you may have seen we launched our AI strategy about 2 weeks ago, and the Chancellor just a couple of hours ago made an announcement about training for another 2,000 AI conversion course places being funded by the government, beginning to deliver that AI strategy. That is clearly one of the critical components of our growth going forward. AI is probably AI and quantum are the two bits of tech where we see, where I see and the government sees the biggest opportunity. So to support that, we're making sure that the most talented people from anywhere in the world can come here. So we've got the Global Talent Visa. We're opening up some new visa routes in about March of next year for growth companies and for high potential individuals. So essentially, if you're one of the best and the brightest from anywhere in the world, you know, the PhD or with an offer to come and join a high growth company, you can basically come straight in, right? Because we want those people to come and locate here. But we also want to train up our own people. Hence the announcement that Rishi made a few hours ago, and hence our funding, £100 million, additionally to what Rishi said, to fund 1,000 artificial intelligence PhD places. We're also investing enormously in big data, make that available to people. That's an essential input into AI. We're looking to invest very heavily in R&D, and you'll hear a lot about that in the spending review in about 3.5 weeks' time. And we're also looking to make sure that the funding is flowing into the sector, whether that's venture capital or whether it's the IPO market. We want to make sure that London isn't just a European leader, but is a global leader for fundraising. And all of that put together, that ecosystem, I believe, will keep driving that we're discussing this evening, or in health. The applications of AI are unbelievable. So a UK company, an Oxford-based company, Accenture, has just this year got a new drug into phase 1 clinical trials in the space of 12 months. Normally, and that was entirely developed by AI. Normally it takes years to develop a new pharmaceutical to get it into clinical trials. They did it in 12 months. We've got companies like Darktrace leading the world in cyber security. They've got AI systems that spot threats before anyone even knows they're there and responds to them in real time. We've got companies like DeepMind, based in King's Cross, now owned by Google, but it was a UK startup, working on proteins and mapping the entire protein universe, which is 100 million different proteins, critical for medical technology. And they've done all of that in the UK using AI applications. So I'm sure others are going to talk more about professional services, but what I want to say today is that digital in general, tech in general, and AI and quantum in particular are without question the future of our economy here. It will mean we undergo a bit of a transition, because there are some jobs done today manually that in 10 years' time won't be, but we should embrace that as an opportunity, not as a threat. And the history of the last 300 years, or 400 years, is that where new technologies emerge, opportunities are created that lead to new employment opportunities, replacing those that have disappeared. So we should be optimistic and not fearful as we look at the future. And in particular, as we think about productivity, this could be the key that unlocks the UK's productivity challenge. This government will do absolutely everything it possibly can to make sure there are no blockages in the runway as our unicorns take off, if unicorns can take off, but they certainly will be taking off here. We are totally committed to making this work. If there's any feedback or ideas from industry, then our door is open, our ears are open. We are here to listen, whatever it takes to make the UK the tech capital, not just of Europe, but of the world. We are here to do it. We're here to make it happen, and the future is bright and optimistic.
Fantastic. What a way to begin this session on a complete high note. Optimistic but not fearful, as I said, Chris. A really brilliant opening salvo. Laura, could I now come to you? I don't know how you can follow that, but you must, and it falls to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I thought it was excellent, Chris, actually, but I hope I can at least sustain the note of optimism. I really like the title of this seminar, Byte Back Better, because, of course, it's a riff on the slogan the Prime Minister and actually President Biden are using about the recovery of society in the aftermath of the pandemic. And I am of the unequivocal view that legal services is an area that is going to be transformed, or could be transformed for the better. The kind of headline story that we heard about legal services all the way through last year was about the backlog, and Labour went really heavy on obviously the court being closed, and then there was the building of the Nightingale courts and so on. What they really missed, actually, was the earthquake that took place in the delivery of legal services, and a lot of that was bringing cases online. And so what basically began from a standing start with nascent technology developed into a year-long pilot that saw everything from a 12-week trial in the High Court to a complex jury inquest in Kent, delivered on a remote basis with witnesses appearing remotely, giving evidence, being cross-examined, the judges hearing really detailed submissions, working from online bundles. And I think that was a really, really, really significant thing. Now, as a barrister, I have to be honest, we are quite an indulgent profession, I think I can say that. So people are very wedded to their ways of doing things. You know, really, even the last case I did before I became an MP, you know, it was still lugging lever arch files to the tribunal, sitting there for God knows how long, waiting around. We have to be honest, it's a massive waste of time, of the client's money, of the use of the public court service. There's been absolutely unforgivable inefficiencies, which I have to say partly tolerated or even encouraged or frankly clung onto by the legal profession, and it was shaken by the guts, I think, because of the pandemic. But let me say why I think it is really, really important to Byte Back Better, using those legal services sort of transformation in the future. So first of all, I think it creates a platform where you can see a much higher quality of justice delivered between, for example, the High Court and the County Court, and also from the Crown Court to the Magistrates Court, because you can start having, obviously with the evolution of tech, better standardised platforms, a more professional environment. So I think we need to build on some of the lessons we saw, particularly the delivery of the High Court trial into the County Court. The second thing which I think is so important is the way that it increases efficiency of time and cost. I've talked about, I think there are obviously some lawyers in here because people nodded in agreement about wasted time in court hearings, and I think that is a really important part of the process that we will start to, you know, actually law firms will be able to offer different pricing models about the way they offer their services, and will be able to think really creatively about how they might offer legal services if more and more law is being brought online. Thirdly, I think there is a really important issue about the administration of justice, and Chris was doing quite heroic work actually. I mean, Lord Wilson, had a really good argument back to Labour, which he said to me because I was doing some sort of radio thing on it, and he was like, the issue actually by the end of the pandemic, so the first half of this year, was not how big our backlog was, it was how quick we were reducing it. And we were reducing it much more quickly than it was building, and we were doing much better than most of our competitor countries. But actually online courts play a role in that, because hearings can be fixed. You don't have all the vicissitudes that affect the normal administration of justice. You know how much time can be lost, and things get rescheduled and cases postponed and everything goes on forever. With a clear sort of online slot, you can stick to the schedule much better, you can whip through the day. A barrister from their own home could appear in more than one hearing from their sitting room. Now I know there's lots of arguments about working from home, working remotely and so on, but I still think that's something to bear in mind, the efficiency with which we can administer justice. Also diversity. Throughout the legal profession there is a problem of attrition, which everybody is aware of. At the beginning of the legal profession, men and women join in equal numbers, but you know, by the time it is women who leave, by the time they're in, say, their mid-30s and they have a baby, they just don't want to go and do a 9-week equal pay case in Carlisle. That was the kind of thing I used to do back in days. I don't think I ever really wanted to do it, but I definitely didn't want to do it with a baby. And lots of people just feel that peripatetic barrister life isn't for them anymore, and they kind of abandon it. And that obviously affects pipeline into the judiciary, and it affects, I think, the quality and diversity of the entire legal profession. If you can have a justice system which at least partially offers more of an online sort of solution, you could expect more diversity, I think, in the judiciary and more at every level in legal professional services, and that's something I think we should take seriously. And then finally, there is the issue of global Britain. There is no doubt that our legal services and our legal landscape is highly desirable. People bring cases here to litigate. And that is because of the strength and the flexibility of English law, and it is because of the quality of our judges. I have to say, I'm talking particularly about obviously civil cases in that regard, but we're all familiar with the massive battles that happen in the High Court. If we can sort of work on the tech, and I'm a real kind of devotee of people like Richard Susskind, I don't know if that's a name that rings a bell to any of you, but I think of all the people who write in this sort of area of law and tech, he's the one who does the most interesting thinking on this. If we can develop the kinds of legal services that he envisages with advanced AI allowing for really complex sort of witness engagement, too boring to go into in a talk, but fascinating if you want to kind of dive deeper into this, then we could start to sort of, you know, really make our legal offering part of global Britain and part of the future, and I think that's something to be really excited about. I've just ended very briefly by coming to some of the counter-arguments, because I have spoken to Derek Sweeting, who's the chair of the Bar Council, and he says, well, you know, he's very concerned about the quality of cross-examination. You know, can you tell, you could be looking at a criminal or a civil case, but can you really tell if somebody's telling the truth, if they're just on a screen or a Zoom? We all know its limitations, so it is a fair point. He also talks about something Labour love talking about, digital exclusion. Not everybody, of course, has a laptop and can they participate. So I think, of course, they're fair arguments. I don't deny that they are. But I really don't think that we should sort of lose the scale of our ambitions. I think what could be achieved through legal services. We could look, for example, at improving the offering in law centres. And I think we can also say, actually, one other point I would say, is that, of course, not every case can be brought online, but we can be much, much more robust about assessing what cases could be dealt with perfectly sensibly in a remote way, whereas perhaps a difficult family case, a child custody case, a mental health case, a serious criminal case would, of course, require a live court hearing, but we would be using the court services and the court buildings in a much more proportionate way, and I hope in doing so we'd be saving the taxpayer money too.
Laura, thank you very much. That was brilliant, thank you. Guy.
Well, follow that. So I stand before you, in fact I sit before you obviously, as a 20-year lawyer who did 9 murder trials, about 150 Crown Court trials, sued government about 150 times, and whose last client was famously Ed Balls as Secretary of State for Children and Young Families. And I won the case for Mr. Balls, or the Secretary of State as we used to call him then, in March 2010. I then became a Member of Parliament to the surprise of the good people of Hexham and myself, and was lucky enough shortly thereafter to be made a minister. And I start with this simple point too, Chris. It's an outstanding opening speech for someone who's only just got this brief for the last 2 weeks. It genuinely was. I'm certain you will not be the shortest serving minister, and there are a lot worse ways frankly to go. My favourite is one of your predecessors, Ed Vaizey, much lamented loss to our colleague in Parliament who was the minister actually at DCMS in charge of mobile and broadband. And when David Cameron rang him to fire him, he was driving around his Wantage constituency. And famously, the mobile coverage in his constituency was so bad that every time Dave picked up the phone to say, "Now listen, Ed, I'm really sorry." And Ed basically tells the story that he remained a minister for 2 hours longer because his mobile connection was so bad, the Prime Minister was unable to fire him in person. Now, I'm certain that won't happen to any of us. I look at the title of this, and if in any way any of you are going to switch off during my short peroration, and you think, you know, Byte Back Better isn't necessarily what I want to listen and learn about, and you start drifting away to your phone and checking your Instagram, it's okay, I understand, because like me, you may have misread the title and thought it said Bark Back Better, and you want to vote for Zola the dog in the Westminster Dog of the Year competition, which is on my Instagram and Twitter, should you wish to do Bark Back Better and you're a bit bored of what I'm about to say. So let's cut to the chase and be serious about something. So I am Minister for Pensions for the last 4 years. I'm in charge of probably the biggest single IT project run by government at the moment, the Pensions Dashboard, where we take 40,000 defined benefit, public sector, defined contribution pensions and bring them all to your mobile phone, your laptop and your iPod. And you do basically everything that you've possibly done with a banking system, with savings apps, and you put it onto a pension app. It is a massive project. I probably will have it on my gravestone that this was the man who tried to do the Pensions Dashboard. but it is also a huge online undertaking that will transform pensions without any shadow of a doubt. At the same stage, I'm the Minister for Financial Inclusion, whose job is to try and take financial services and all the things that we take for granted and make them available to one and all in a tech-friendly way, in a vulnerable patient way, so that we genuinely can transform the way that society looks at this. And I speak also as an online entrepreneur, so I set up a bank called Atom Bank, which is a pretty major online bank. It's completely online, there's no branches whatsoever, it's based in County Durham, employs several hundred people, and it's basically first direct but better. And then I set up a second bank, which is called the Northumberland Community Bank, which is again is online. And this is all while I was a whip in the government whip's office, but obviously I'm not running those now anymore. And that provides savings and loan on an online basis to people in Northumberland who need access to it. And genuinely, I've seen the online transformation that takes place in banking, and think that this is going to permeate in all aspects of society. If we'd asked you 5 years ago to stick your hand up if you had a savings app, very few of you would have said that. Maybe some of you would have had a banking app, but now pretty much everybody in this room would have a banking app. Pretty much everybody would have a savings app. I am old enough when I used to actually meet a man called Paul Montanaro, a bank manager. And I'd actually go and meet this person once every year and have a chat about him. And anyone with grey hair knows exactly this feeling. Of course, we now engage with our bank on a daily basis when we check your banking app and you check your bank account in a way that you never could possibly do before. So I was going to make 3 key points. The first is the development of online unicorns is going to be one of the greatest lawyer who exists in the UK right now. Let me just teach you some stuff. I would have been absolutely transfixed. We have the power to do that now. And all the law schools should be looking at how it is that they are communicating. Just as frankly, I want my kid to learn from some of the greatest scientists in the world. I don't necessarily want it from Mr. Miggins, who's been teaching science for the last 30 years at Haybridge High School, necessarily. There is opportunities to do fantastic stuff in an online space, and I cannot understand why more are not doing that. And I finished on one thing, which is, as Minister for Financial Inclusion, I'm trying to take savings and loans and the like and making them accessible to everywhere. And I look at companies like, and obviously as a government minister, I think all companies are good and I cannot prefer any particular one. But I have to say the company that's knocked spots out of all others, and I would recommend Chris goes and meets them, is Moneybox. It has utterly transformed online savings and digital engagement with savings amongst low paid and middle class as well. And it is the brave new world in my view. It is an honour and a privilege to be here. It is great to see Chris's enthusiasm in a job that, as Ed basically discovered, can be your nemesis. But I regret that I've got to run at about 6 o'clock, but I have to say, this is a very important thing. And if you can't bark back better, then you definitely should bite back better.
Guy, I think if it does say anything on a tombstone, it will be the man who delivered the dashboard.
Bloody
not the man who tried. But thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. And we should all, in all seriousness, vote for Guy's dog. I'm now going to come to Charlotte. You have had a hell of 18 months, I suspect. Zoom has gone from, well, being a company that few people perhaps engage with to being something that's integrated into all of our lives. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question and how you see it from the perspective of one of the great innovators in the economy at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I mean, it's been a phenomenal privilege to get that kind of front row seat of how different parts of the economy and different parts of society have taken up challenger company like Zoom and continue to thrive during the pandemic. It's been a really difficult time. We feel very humble as a company about that journey that we've had and the conditions for it, but we're also very positive about what comes next. The genie is out of the bottle in so many different ways. That there's so much I could respond to in what the guys have said so eloquently and optimistically here. But if you have been sat under a rock and don't know Zoom, we were the most downloaded app on the Apple App Store of 2020, more so than the NHS Track and Trace app. So when we think about things like our role in public service delivery, in the education system, in the legal system, which I'll talk a bit about, you know, there is a moment where as I say, the genie is out of the bottle, and that a decade, what could have been a decade's transformation has happened in the space of just 18 months. And actually the UK, as an adopter of remote working or hybrid working, is the highest amongst the G7 countries. So this is an area where the UK is a real leader. Zoom went from tens of millions of users prior to the pandemic to hundreds of millions of globally. So about 5% of the world's population was using us, unique users daily. We've been really proud to support tech innovators, some of those unicorns that Chris so lovingly refers to, Skyscanner, Samop, Wise. We've been really proud to have them as customers of ours. But also the other end of the spectrum, the Citizens Advice of this world, Great Ormond Street Hospital, we worked with very quickly to get them in a really positive place as well. So the front row seat we've had has been phenomenal. So what are the kind of key points I'll dwell upon? I know Will, you mentioned talking about public service delivery, which we can go into, but I think, to Guy's education points, there is a moment where our universities have fundamentally changed, our schools are changing, we have devices now in the hands of children up and down the country. How do we make sure that that system and that learning actually equips for that world of work and what comes next as well? We know that 74% of employees work fully or partially remotely. That's something we expect to continue. And 3/4 of businesses as well believe that tools like Zoom will be essential going forward. So let me focus a bit on this legal and professional services question. I think Zoom is perhaps most famously known for the "I am not a cat" viral incident where there was a judge who logged on and had a cat filter and wasn't able to help. Now, it is actually very straightforward to turn off a cat filter if you do face that problem. I'll be happy to show people how, or indeed turn it on if that's what you want to do. We're really proud to support some of the UK's largest legal services companies, and we've been really proud of the role we've played, particularly internationally, in helping courts adapt. There was a recent survey of 1,500 judges from across HNCTS, and they found that Zoom was the most popular platform with an 83% satisfaction rate. And I think that's in part because it's frictionless, it's easy to use, it's safe, it's secure, and we're really proud of putting that experience right at the heart of what we do. I know we're obviously going to be keen to get Q&A to Mrs. So I won't go on forever, but I think there's a question here that Laura referred to, which is around we're aware that 2/3 of the population do not have access to legal service, and I think, again, if we are to think about some of those inclusion questions, we know that organisations like Citizens Advice using Zoom, to the Legal Aid Association, digital adoption and that acceleration of Zoom actually can unlock some of those issues that we've seen historically quite quickly. I'll leave my comments at that, other than to say the optimism is right, it's correct. We have a moment here where we can't roll back. The genie's out of the bottle, and Zoom's really proud to play a part in helping all parts of the economy adapt to the new future. So thank you.
Just give Onward's thanks, because Zoom allowed us to continue holding events, and it was honestly a complete transformative business. Thank you. Tracy, our last speaker, but by no means the least, I'd love to hear from you in the SRA's respect.
Yeah, well, it's in some ways it's good to speak last because you can pick up everybody else's good ideas, but I'll resist the temptation and try and talk about what I'm here to talk about anyway. As the regulator, I always try to say to people, we have to be optimistic, but we have to be realistically optimistic, because obviously as a regulator you're here to balance all the good things that we want to see happening in legal services, but also acknowledge that for some it's going to be a different approach that's needed. So I think it's easy to forget that technology is something everyone has to wrestle with, and actually it's no different to any other sector of the economy. So I absolutely agree, it's not a reason not to support law tech. It's very easy to take the Luddite approach, and that benefits nobody. It doesn't benefit the economy, but more importantly, it doesn't benefit people who currently are not accessing justice or the help they need. So we try very much as a regulator to embrace technology. I've only been at the SRA a reasonably short time, and I had a long career in Whitehall as a civil servant, where I've worked on many innovation strategies, enterprise strategies. And the key thing is you have to get buy-in.
And there's no point demonising people or putting them in different camps. We've all got to be behind this one, because as everybody's already said, it's a massive positive for the UK economy. We're very innovative, we have brilliant institutions, we have great professional standards. I would say we have some really good regulators. Our board at the SRA has been pushing us. We've got a whole objective around making sure that technology and innovation is the heart of what we do in the corporate strategy. I think my only plea would be for ministers to get more regulators working together a little bit more and talking to each other. So I often get slightly a sense of deja vu of my old life in Whitehall when I have to talk to another regulator and say, oh well, but we haven't really done that. And I think, actually, you don't need to do it again. We need to work in collaboration on some of these things because we can move forward very quickly. And the biggest lesson I ever learned from companies when I was in the Department of Business is, why do you all have to tell us it sequentially? Why can't we hear from you all at the same time? So to just get rid of some of those loose ends, let's join up a bit, would be a fantastic step forward in the field of law tech. I pay tribute, though, to, again, our board members in pushing us as a regulator, because it's easy to think that access to justice is somehow a conceptual question, whereas actually if you look at it the other way and think about the practicalities, as Laura said, let's use technology in different ways. Many people don't want to go in to a high street solicitor anymore. They're more than happy to take it as a video conference. People never talk enough about medtech and the parallels with law tech. Medtech is another area where there are massive strides, and it's a massive selling point for the UK. Digital enables advice to be given almost cross-jurisdictionally, and as ministers have already said, English law is very powerful. And we're not making the most of that, I don't think. So again, as a regulator, that's where we're coming in. We want to be optimistic, but realistically optimistic is how I describe it. My other point was going to be around skills and understanding where small businesses are. So I think we talk a lot about consumers and we think about the individual consumer, but a very important benefit, I think, of law tech could be the use it could be to other small businesses. And I'd love to see a bit more sort of interest about how we can approach smaller businesses to really make some of what they do enabled much more. Simple legal questions could be dealt with in all sorts of innovative ways, in my view. And there's quite a lot of projects that we're trying to get behind. If I may, if I could just touch on a couple of projects. We were really delighted. We just won something called the Regulators Pioneer Fund funding, and we have a project that we're just about to launch. We're going to be working with law centres. We're going to be doing it in the west of England, and we're going to be working with university business schools as well, and we're going to do some proof of concept testing, because that's very important, because one of the things that I've discovered in my time in this role is people are just frightened and they don't want to be that first mover. So they'd rather know that they're made to use this technology, or actually even something quite simple like a case management system frightens a lot of people. So actually, if we, the regulator, can share more, we've got a thing called SRA Innovate that I'm really keen that everyone should talk about a bit more, because you can come to us as a regulator. We don't just find people for bad behaviour. We're here to help, and we're here to help with compliance, because that actually makes for a better situation in terms of standards being observed and the experience that customers or clients will have. So that's how we can help as well in a practical sense. And the other thing is the power of evidence. So in July we published some research that we commissioned from Oxford University. And it's actually quite an interesting read, because never had anybody thought to segment the legal services market and understand where tech actually is a bit of a no-brainer. And where it's an absolute desert at the moment, but you could triage some advice. You could say to people, no, you absolutely need to get help on this one, and here's an app that will help you identify what you can do. During lockdown, we all know how much domestic violence increased. It was a horrible outcome of the pandemic. We've got a little bit of funding, and we did a project about a domestic violence app, where people from their home, in which they may be in real serious difficulty, could get help linking up to local advice centres and so on. All of that was done through technology. So it can be much more of a help than something that's going to compound the so-called digital divide. I don't think talking about a digital divide, unless you've got some solutions, should be allowed. So yes, it's an issue. What are we going to do about it? And how can we work practically to do something about it? I think that would be how I'd want that approach. And a final thing, Agile Nations Network, I don't think anyone much has heard of it. It's a massive thing that the government have initiated with other jurisdictions. I'm privileged to lead a working group of that. We can learn from all sorts of places. And in some jurisdictions, really, they are looking to us to lead the way. We've got Canada and the UAE, massive amount of money in investment in technology and swishing around in UAE, and they want to invest with us. So brokering some of the stuff that is meeting a need for the citizen or the small business is good for our legal profession and is easier for us to regulate because actually it enables better, higher standards to be met. That has to be what I'm calling the sort of the prize here. And I think it's one that we can achieve. So I'm optimistic, but I realise work needs to be done. I think we as a regulator acknowledge readily we have a role to play. But
it's not every day that you hear a regulator talk in such a kind of can-do, pro-innovation attitude. It's really, really brilliant.
it stems right from our board. We're really, really important to do that. It's not good enough to say it won't work.
Thank you. So I'm very conscious that we've got Guy for about 4 minutes longer. So I'm going to prioritise. If anyone has a question they particularly want to ask Guy Opperman, yes. There's no microphone, so please do.
Just shout.
Anne Fairweather from Hargreaves Lansdowne. Just really interested in the opportunities, and as we're looking as a firm at the tech that we invest in and what we think we can do for our clients for their savings and investings and helping to guide them, very quickly come up against regulatory barriers, but also it's not just regulatory, it's also in law. And to some extent, you know, the level of investment we're putting into that to be able to break that advice guidance gap and get better outcomes for our consumers is very tied up to legal thinking. So it's a bit of a plea as well, especially when we're looking at the work that you're doing in DCMS around AI and the like. There are huge opportunities here for us, but we really need to sort of all be working together to sort of look at the legal framework so that as we innovate and change, we're actually making sure we are picking up any things that can go wrong, and I'm not naive about it. There's a lot of scope for things to go wrong, right? So we need to look for that. But I think at the moment there isn't a joined up conversation about what is the market we want in 10 years' time when we've got the pensions dashboard, when we've got open finance, when we've got all of that data, when we're in a situation now where we can't use the data we have on our clients already to help them make them better investors.
Thank you very much, Anne.
I'll take that first, and then Chris might want to come in with sort of the longer term picture. So, I mean, the simple point is that the innovation that you seek is a work in progress. You know, open banking is still not fully up and running, but there is no doubt that if we had this conversation in 3 to 5 years, I think all of the technical services that we now do to a certain degree in paper or partly on paper form are going to be in a data format. The second is that there is clearly going to be a division, in my view, of one of the jobs that Chris has got to try and do is how do you regulate organisations like Google, and how do you do the online harms bill, and how do you drive forward the sort of data delivery that we all want and we all can see, with also the protections that we all need. And there is a way, there is a pathway to that. It's complex though, and it is not necessarily simple. But it is also something that I'm very passionate about and I believe can be done. I'd slightly also make the point that you can already do most of what you're doing. So I say to people, well, we're going to do the pensions dashboard, and some companies like Aviva would say, well, we do that already with our customers. I'd say to them, well, you know, why aren't you doing, like, for example, a midlife MOT? So if you're a man, your midlife is at 47. Ladies, it happens at a later stage because you live longer. But basically, that is the time when you actually evaluate your mortality, what you need to save, when you're going to retire, all of those sort of things. And that, what was done very successfully by certain companies, and I know that Hargreaves have looked at it, is imagine you had that conversation with people at particular stages of their working life. Clearly, when you start, when you get married, first child, promotion to XYZ, and then obviously 47 is the key date. And at those stages, you nudge them into behaviour, whether that is saving more, whether it is retraining, whether it's taking advantage of the lifetime skills guarantee. There are so many opportunities that already can be done by certain businesses. I accept, though, it is a work in progress. I think it does require some very heavy lifting across government, though. And to pretend that that is not, you know, it's not just DCMS, there's BEIS, there's Treasury, there's a lot of other moving parts. But it is going to be one of the challenges, if not of this Parliament, then definitely the early stages of the next Parliament, in my view.
Guy, thank you very much. And I know that
I'm dying as Ashley.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you so much indeed. Don't forget to Byte Back Better.
Chris, do you want to come in on this question as well about just how you can better join up across government? I suppose that is a key challenge in your new role.
Yeah, so it turns out that DCMS doesn't hold all of the levers in its own hands, so we have to work closely with, unfortunately, not least the purse strings, it turns out, held by the Treasury, not by us. So it is really important that we work with particularly the Treasury on funding new initiatives, with BAYS on particularly R&D and trying to get that commercialised, and with DFE on skills and training, whether that's kind of life, like conversion courses, people in midlife, whether it's teaching people in schools new skills like coding and so on, or whether it's advanced PhDs, right? So all of that goes via DFE. And then finally, we have to work with the Home Office, my old department, in terms of making sure that people who are super bright can get in with like zero hassle and zero aggravation. So all of those things together are really important. I think one of the things I can try and do is act as a sort of convener across government, but also drawing in views from industry. So I've spent a lot of time already talking to key industry bodies and also leading companies about what they need government to do. On the regulatory question, I mean, I'm someone who believes in free markets. I believe in liberty. I believe in letting 1,000 flowers bloom, generally speaking. And I would like us to try and keep regulation to the bare minimum necessary. That is, interestingly, not a view instinctively taken by the European Union. So a potential source of competitive advantage to this country in the coming years is that we can regulate here, I think, more sensibly, meaning less, than the European Union, giving our innovative industries an advantage. Guy mentioned some of the things we're looking at. There's the Online Harms Bill, which is designed to stop social media platforms allowing harmful content to propagate unchecked. I think that is an important area for us to look at. He mentioned also just taking a look at some of these markets from a monopoly perspective. And clearly, like Google has a very high market share in search, for example. And then finally, when it comes to emerging technologies like AI, we want to set a framework, a regulatory framework here in the UK that is sort of a world first, so other countries adopt it, but it's also as light touch as it possibly can be. We don't want to create like a new AI regulator. We want to adopt existing, just like fine tune existing or tweak existing regulators rather than inventing whole new regulatory organisations. Clearly, the intersection of AI and personal finance advice is potentially quite a delicate one, because normally you let AI loose on a problem that has like a sort of provably true or false answer, right? You can just iterate and get it right over time. Obviously, personal finance doesn't have a provably correct right or wrong answer. And if you let an AI bot loose on someone's portfolio and cause it to crash in value, you're not going to be very popular. So clearly there are some pitfalls to navigate, but I'm sure this jurisdiction will do it in a way that is sensible, proportionate, and light touch, and mean that we can just continue leading the world.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to try and open up to a few other questions. Not only have we had two ministers on the panel, but we also have a very distinguished former minister in the audience. Lord Bethel, do you want to take a question?
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, what a moving testimony from all the panelists. I mean, I thought it was a really great contribution. Thank you very much indeed. Laura spoke really interestingly about how the burning platform of COVID saw decades or even centuries of change in the legal system. I mean, it was just really, really powerful. We all know what the legal system has been like, and it's so interesting the way you described it. And Tracy was absolutely right that in health tech, we had exactly the same thing. Trying to get online consultations in GPs had been something that never looked like it was going to get anywhere until COVID came along. And Guy, of course, a lot of what he was talking about was born of the financial crisis. So these are big burning platforms that have driven through amazing changes incredibly quickly. Chris is right. I think productivity is possibly the burning platform that we face at the moment, but it doesn't have the same electricity and the same sort of saliency and impetus. And so my question for everyone is a difficult one, which is, how do we create that sense of urgency that has in the past proved to be necessary to see through quick change and innovation? And how do we create that urgency around something like productivity, which is really trying to drag people into delivering more for in their roles?
Thank you so much, Jake. Can I come to Laura first?
Well, that's a really good question, I think. So how do we improve productivity in legal services through the use of tech? I think the sort of easy answer, which is, of course, you can kind of monitor output better and better. So, for example, I was talking about hearings, and everyone knows who's experienced with it, the flab of the court day, and the way that a hearing can take forever and much too long. The disproportionality, I would say, in live legal services could be reduced. I suppose that is probably the clue to the next bit of the answer, although I'm not 100% sure what it is what people are really looking for in a legal service. And Tracy talked about, you were talking about people not wanting to go to a high street solicitors, but what is the core thing that the person wants? Let's say they've got a neighbour dispute. They want to get written advice about their prospects of success. They want to make an assessment of the cost of using a court service or mediating. And then if they go through the court, let's just say neighbour dispute just because they're so intense when they happen, it goes crazy and all like fight to the death over the tree or whatever. But they happen and they do affect people's lives quite regularly. And then they want, and then if they do go to court, they want a short, focused hearing which will determine whose rights are whose and whether there's a compensatory amount of money that has to be paid by somebody. And in a way, I suppose, just that sort of proportionality and focus on the whole thing, rather than the meeting at the solicitors, lots of correspondence that goes on forever, ratcheting up costs, allows, I think, you to sort of measure and redefine the way a legal service will be offered. And therefore, it can allow the consumer to look at different legal service providers and assess who's doing the best job, the best value for money. And by the way, I do think across the legal sector, there is a need to offer better value for money. And I work in civil, sort of more commercial stuff. I mean, it is incredibly costly, disproportionately so, to litigate because of some of the costs that are incurred. And I think we have to be, as a lawyer, I was a lawyer more than a politician, we have to be realistic about the fact that sometimes people actually, maybe quite affluent people, are locked out of quite sensible disputes, but they really would like to kind of push a bit on that issue because it's just going to be madly expensive. So I think proportionality in cost, timing, the offering of services, better competition through the legal market would be measurable.
Laura, thank you very much. Tracy and then Charlotte, do you want to come back on this question of urgency? How do you create urgency amongst the companies that you're regulating?
I'm a great believer in transparency, and you'll be pleased to know we are just about to start some pilot activity around what we're calling unbundling, so that actually you can demystify some of the legal services about what you would be getting, what's a fair price, and so on. I'll give a shout out for the CMA. They did a report on the review of legal services last year. That had some very interesting questions around, why isn't legal services been embracing the online, comparison sites and so on, whilst it's clearly not a hotel room that people are buying. Actually, piloting things like quality indicators that we're currently doing has been quite a revelation. Because actually people don't need the faffy version. They need to know, is there a reasonable outcome and expectation that will achieve this outcome, and how do we do that? How do you make more transparent data available? I think that would boost the productivity. I would think also that would sell the tech and the case management systems, some simple online tools that actually many other sectors have been using for years. Why is there been resistance? Why are we still half a dozen trees get, the file of papers that you have to take to court? I would have thought that there's going to be a bit more of a consumer pull, and I think creating that pull and that consumer demand for different might also really help. And I think the other thing, financial service regulation, which I did before I came to the SRA, when you can have the 90 quid audit, or you can have the one with KPMG that still goes wrong and you still get the sort of Pat Bell scandal, has probably brought a lot more reality check to people about what they are purchasing and why, and what's really important. And again, if tech can add another layer to that by boosting knowledge of what the spectrum is, it might cost you this, might cost you that, the middle option is this the conveyancer for you? That's not a bad thing, and actually might get more people taking the service, so it essentially grows the market. So I think a bit of normal competition policy might actually have a better benefit here than if people who are resisting it at the moment would think.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, talk to me.
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. I think innovation within systems that creates those productivity gains cannot be seen as a kind of one and done. We've done that because there was a pandemic and now that's over and we'll maybe keep most of it. It has to be, as you know very well in what you achieved in your role, that has to be a continuous process. Now, you know, when I think of the applications of Zoom in the legal settings that we've been talking about today, we know there can sometimes be a problem with getting translators or people who don't have English as a first language into the quarterly features, which we'd be happy to talk further about. We also recently launched something called Zoom Apps on our platform, which enables different types of applications to be integrated into the Zoom experience. So many things that you may have heard of, like Dropbox, project management systems, it's not unfeasible, but case management systems that Tracy was referring to, could be built into that experience. I think when I say about that kind of constant culture of innovation, it can't be one and done. I think there was one thing that I think was slightly concerning for this issue of competition and choice, is that Ministry of Justice decided to build its own video conferencing system during the pandemic. You know, other private sector video conferencing platforms are available, but it seems to me that as we look at what the good bits that we want to take from that have helped ease some of those blockers in the system, that the private sector is very well placed for some of those ongoing innovations that will help to adapt in particular sectors. So it's about culture, it's about embracing technology, and it's about leadership in a lot of ways.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I'm going to give the final words to, I'm afraid we're running straight on time, but I'm going to give the final word to the Minister. Chris.
I'm just going to give a 10-second answer to James's question, but before I do, James, just to pay tribute to your work as a health minister during the pandemic. I mean, you and the team did a fantastic job in unbelievably difficult circumstances, and I know when we had an issue with COVID tests at the MOJ about a year ago, you got it sorted straight away, so thank you for your phenomenal work during that 18-month period. To answer your very tough and very good question about productivity, I've got two answers, and one Charlotte has partly answered already. I think a combination of relentless innovation with competition makes productivity gains not a choice but a necessity for businesses. And so providing we can foster in this country an environment where innovation happens the whole time, that will force incumbents to raise their game or simply lose their market share and lose their shirt. So innovation is the first battering ram that will drive through productivity. But the second answer, I think, is a slightly different view of our labour market now compared to the last 20 years up to, I guess, the 31st of December last year, the end of the transition period. We've built an economy in the last 20 or 25 years on essentially an abundant supply, in fact an almost inexhaustible supply of cheap labour. And as an alternative to investing in technology and in better management techniques and in training, I think British business has generally reached for cheap labour instead of investment in productivity enhancing methods, whether that's technology, training or better management. Now that is not the government strategy. We're very explicit. We want to have, we don't want to have large-scale, low-skill immigration. Where we have immigration, we want it to be high-skilled, as I was describing earlier. And that will create labour pressures on employers that we're seeing a little bit already, and that will force companies to innovate. And there will be a sort of a bit of a transition period as that happens, but it will force innovation. It will force the adoption of more productive techniques, and ultimately will emerge from that transitionary period with an economy with higher underlying productivity. And as a great American economist said, Will remind me who it was, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. Krugman, yeah, Krugman, there we are. So I think it is critical to our national mission, and I think digital technology, AI, quantum computing, and of course, excellently constructed video conferencing services are all central to that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and that's a brilliant way to end the session. As someone who was in the Home Office 5 or 6 years ago, saying exactly what you just said, but feeling like we were the only people in government saying it, it's fantastic to see a business secretary, a prime minister standing up and saying that we're moving from a low-wage, low-productivity economy to a high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity one. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to our panellists. I'm not going to try and sum up everything because it's been so rich that I wouldn't do it justice, but it's been an enormously optimistic, forward-looking session. We've talked about a huge amount, and I, for one, have been left with a huge amount of optimism about the UK professional services industries generally, but the legal services industry specifically. and the opportunity for the UK to continue to lead the world in driving innovation and delivering value for customers, for companies, and for the wider economy. So thank you all, and thank you in particular to the SRA for helping us put on this discussion, and to all of our panellists for giving such open and thoughtful remarks. So if you can all just join me in one final round of applause, and then we'll end.